Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network from Lucas Oil Stadium, site of the Big Ten Championship game where Oregon will take on Penn State Saturday night. You can watch it on CBS. You can stream it on Paramount+. All right, we've gotten the full breakdown. We've gotten our best bets for that game. Let's turn our attention elsewhere, where it looks like Texas already has a lead on Georgia. Okay, so just recent news as we're sitting here talking. Justice Terry, who is a five-star prospect in the 2025 recruiting class, he was down to Georgia and Texas and a few others. He did not sign on Wednesday, National Signing Day, but did decide on Friday to commit to the Longhorns. So, Bud, am I correct? I don't have my math calculator on right now, but is that Texas number one on lock right now? And what should we know about Justice Terry?
That is Texas number one. Hook them for the number one class. I don't think they're really catchable right now unless just some incredibly weird stuff were to happen. What should you know about Justice Terry? If you see this guy at a camp, be like, good Lord, God does not make it many folks at 18 years old who look like this. Like that, he's a freak, man. Strong, physical, great length, point of attack player. I think he'll play early for Texas. And really, with what Texas has done, reloading the defensive line of scrimmage, think about who they lost to the draft last year with Sweat and Murphy. And this year, like Broughton stepped up, and because they keep signing all these elite five-star bodies and molding them in to good players, just another guy that I think will just probably crush for the Longhorns. And Texas there, as we see on the screen with 312 points, that's a substantial lead over Alabama. And obviously Georgia couldn't leap up to catch them because they didn't get Justice Terry.
Wow. Impressive stuff. Again, that happening just here on Friday. Justice Terry, five-star defensive lineman, committing to the Longhorns over Georgia and others. All right, now let's turn. That's the future, where it does look like Steve Sarkisian is just going to continue building that monster.
They're going to be all
Austin.
right.
Yeah, they're going to be all right. But they might not be all right here on the offensive line with Kelvin Banks' status up in the air. What would that mean if he's not able to go against a Georgia defensive front that ate Texas's lunch when these two teams played in Austin earlier this year?
Maybe it means more Arch Manning. I mean, I've kind of alluded to that a bunch of times on here when we broke down the game and talking about our locks. I think you could see him. They already sprinkled him in against A&M, and Quinn Ewers being so banged up, being limited with his legs because of that ankle injury. I wonder if that's what it means. But I do think this Longhorn offensive line as a unit, with or without him, has to have taken that game personally. And they look at that as a challenge and say, all right, what do we do to respond? Now that they've seen it, they've got a taste of what it's like going against Georgia. It almost felt like they were shell-shocked that first time around. I think they'll play better even if Banks doesn't go. I just feel like there's got to be some sort of pride. And I also think Georgia is not the same defense. For whatever reason, they have not looked as dominant. Maybe they work out some more motions. They're moving the ball around, getting the ball out of your hands quicker. And again, like I go back to Haynes King for Georgia Tech. They had so much success with the running quarterback. I think that's something they might have up their sleeve as well.
You know, what worries me, anytime you lose somebody on your offensive line, if Banks doesn't play, it's never a good thing. But I'd rather it be 3 weeks after the injury than the very first game after the injury, because playing together on an offensive line, you need time to gel, to figure out what the guys next year do and get things in order. And if you look at Texas on the whole this season, they haven't had injuries on the offensive line. So it's not like the backups have been able to come in and get a ton of experience and snaps. So you look at the situation where he's one of the best tackles in the country. You're going up against one of the best defensive lines in the country, a defensive line that already whooped your butt. And now you're playing in Atlanta, which is pretty much a home game for Georgia. It is going to be a very loud environment. And now you've got an inexperienced left tackle. You're going to see pre-snap penalties. You are going to see false starts that are going to put them in bad spots if he doesn't play. So it's not a good position to be in if you're the Longhorns.
I do think if you're Sark, though, you got a chance to see how Kirby Smart wants to attack your offense. And to your point, Tom, I fully agree. I think left tackle will be a problem. But Gooseby stepped in last week for Banks in a very loud environment against an NFL pass rusher in Scorton and was kind of fine. Like we didn't really notice it like that much. At one point I looked, it's like, that's not Banks. Like Gooseby's a little taller than Banks. Like Gooseby's in the game. He's holding up against Scorton just fine. I do think there's an element of like game scripting here where everything went perfect for Georgia in that first matchup. We give Carson Beck so much credit for threading the needle on that one throw that he made. But if he tries that throw 10 times, it's probably tipped and picked a couple times. Like it just narrowly kind of snuck through there. That's to his credit. Great ball. But like, I think if I'm Texas, I want to see that again. I want to see if Texas can tackle all these screens, or if Georgia can tackle all my screens perfectly again, because they got Texas guys on the ground really well in that matchup, and they had a favorable like down distance and scoreboard situation from which to play that Texas offense, because they got up so fast, big in that game. They just pinned their ears back and rushed the passer so well. I don't know that it plays out exactly the same way this week.
Danny, has Carson Beck gotten better? Or has the offense gotten better? Take me through the roller coaster season that Carson Beck has had, because a 6-game stretch, the team goes 4-2. He's got like 12 interceptions in that 6-game stretch, 10 touchdowns, and then things seem to have flipped. So what have you seen in terms of Carson Beck's late season performance?
I think a lot of it was mental with Carson Beck, whether he was trying to force it, trying to do too much, wasn't seeing the field. But since that game against Ole Miss, when they got smoked and he had another 3-interception game, he's thrown 11 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. And I do think there is something about Carson Beck when he runs it just a little bit. Like what game was it where it was a Tennessee game where he ran over the defender and kind of got a big first down and gave a big emotional. Like, I felt it kind of woke him up. And I'd like to see him even use a little bit of his legs early in the game just to get in the flow of it. But I ultimately think it is about him seeing the field more. He's gotten more comfortable. Oscar Delp, your guy, has kind of emerged as a red zone target. He's gotten more comfortable with his receivers. The other thing, too, and Carson Beck has taken so much criticism. You know who leads the country in drops?
Georgia.
Yeah, so I mean, his receivers have to do a better job, and I think they have lately, but they also dropped a couple balls against Georgia Tech. They haven't exactly fixed the problem, but I think Carson Beck has finally just relaxed, and he's not pressing as much as he was during that stretch where he was really bad.
And I think it's easier to relax when you don't have a defensive lineman in your lap every single snap. And I think the return of Tate Ratledge to their offensive line, who'd missed time in the middle of the season, coincided with when Beck was throwing all those interceptions and playing poorly. I think his return has steadied things on their offensive line. It has steadied things in protection, and it has given him more time in the pocket to operate and see things down the field. And I think he's just making better decisions because of it.
I'm not fully sold on Beck yet. If you look at what they did last week against Georgia Tech, obviously they had to come back. But why? Well, they weren't scoring any points for about the first 20 minutes of that ball game.
Down 17-0 early.
It was not until Georgia Tech had their top 3 cornerbacks leave the game with injury that Carson Beck just started taking all these screens and checkdowns, and Tech's backup corners, surprise, surprise, aren't good enough to tackle Georgia's starting skill guys. The downfield stuff for Georgia largely wasn't working. They were having to use Arian Smith because Colby Young is still out, probably won't be back until the playoff. They're using Arian Smith on more traditional routes as opposed to just like, kind of tricked up deep shots and stuff, which is what he's decent at. He's not really a very good actual playing the position of receiver as we've seen over 4 years. And he's got those drops, and Beck has some competition with him, I think, obviously. Texas secondary is way better than the Georgia Tech backups. And I think if they try all the check down, just take what they give them type stuff against Texas, that's not going to lead to explosives out of those near often as it did last week.
That is a great point, pointing out that Georgia Tech, I mean, Carson Beck was awesome. He was slicing and dicing them, but they were out, 5 or 6 corners.
Yeah, their top 3 were done.
Yeah.
But how does this game go? Do you feel like you've got a sense for it? Like how this thing might play out?
I think Texas is playing better down the stretch than Georgia. I've just been more impressed with them. I mean, Georgia struggled with Florida for a decent bit of that game. Obviously, the Tech game, I don't think having to come back against Tech with Tech's top 3 corners out is that good of a win. You needed 8 overtimes to get them. Meanwhile, Texas has been playing really well down the stretch. They hammered, I know it's Florida's backup third string quarterback. They hammered Kentucky, right? They take care of business last week, and in a physical way against a pretty good A&M team. I think Texas gets it done here.
I'm on Georgia. It's funny, we're talking about Carson Beck and how much better he's looked. I think we should talk more about Quinn Ewers and how, frankly, I think average Quinn Ewers has looked, at least compared to what you expect from him and what you would think in this offense. He's been banged up. He missed time earlier this year. I still don't think he's 100%. Just watching him, he doesn't look like he's at full capability. I think that limits what they can do offensively, particularly in the passing game. The downfield shots have kind of just completely disappeared. And when you look at the receivers that they have on that roster, it's like, why aren't they throwing to these guys down the field? I don't think it's because they don't realize they have them. I think it's because they don't trust their quarterback's ability to do it right now. So I think Georgia right now, just based on what they did in the first meeting, I don't think it's going to be anything like it was. I don't think they will completely overwhelm them the way they did in that game. But I think that they're going to win this one. I think that they're going to win the SEC.
I'm going to go with Texas. I think that defense has been so impressive. In much as we were talking about Carson Beck, I'm kind of with Bud. I don't know if he's completely fixed. He is playing freer, but this stage, like, how does it go if he gets pressure? What's interesting, too, about Texas, just talking about their offense, I know Isaiah Bond has been banged up, but they really haven't had that receiver, that go-to guy. And what I don't know is it they're missing the guys they had last year, or is it because Quinn Ewers is banged up? But Gunnar Helm has been their best, target. It's kind of like Penn State. Like, I mean, and he's not even as good as Tyler Warren. So I just wonder if the limitations are there in the pass game. But again, I think Arch Manning, they're going to sprinkle more of him in with his legs, maybe even passing the ball as well, too. And I don't think it's a huge package. Maybe it's just 5 or 6 plays. But again, all these games, when you've got a point spread of 2.5 points, it could come down to 1 or 2 big plays. And we saw that in A&M. Arch Manning comes in for one play inside the red zone, rushes for a touchdown. I mean, that game was tight. That touchdown was huge.
Contravious Wisner is playing better.
Yep.
Down here at the end of the... And look,
yes.
He's a young player, Like, he's thrown into the fire. Cedric Baxter goes down. All of a sudden, the injuries are piling up. Your workload is... And the coaching staff has to figure out what they can give him, what he can go in there for. And I think he's playing better at the end of the season. And while the left side might be a concern if Banks can't go, that right side of the offensive line for Texas has gotten a good job of getting some push. If they can run the football with Wisner, I think that opens up a lot of stuff for this Texas offense. I'm fired up for this game. I lean Texas. It's a guaranteed lock. It's going to be the Texas Longhorns. Come on, don't come soft with it. But I think Texas wins this football game. Because,
I'm on an island.
Yep, I just think they've been playing better and more consistently down the stretch.
And Island with Kirby Sparks not a bad place to be. I think
right.
Wisner's seeing it too. Like he's actually seeing the blocking scheme now. You can tell. I think earlier in the year he was kind of guessing, and now he's trusting it, understanding like what kind of blocks he needs to read, and I think that's just made him so much more efficient.
Don't discount the motivation that is provided by banning Bevo from the Mercedes Dome. That is going to be their calling card after the game. Remember Kirby Smart when they went to Texas, like we wanted to eat. What do you think Sark's going to say? They can't take Bevo out of our game. He's going to use that.
Yeah, listen, you watch. It'll happen. All right, coming up on the other side, we turn our attention to the ACC championship game. College football playoff implications, sure. But what about this matchup between Clemson and SMU? We'll get into all that and more next.
Finally, real football. Let's go.